We're going to, as we wait for the projector to warm up, I want to thank everyone to the latest iteration of Sergio Leone's 1966 spaghetti western classic, The Good, Bad, and Ugly. We're going to use that through that lens, we're going to talk a little bit about CMMI, some of its past successes, some of the current initiatives, and what you can expect if you're trying to run an ACO in Florida. Fantastic, right? My name is Matt Lambert. I'm the CMO for Creation Health. Emergency medicine is my clinical background. I've spent a long time in DC. Some might even say too long. Previous lives, a long time with the advisory board. Also, as the Chief Medical Information Officer for New York City Health and Hospitals. And when you're a CMIO, you learn two things. You learn that change management is best learned by listening 80% of the time and talking 20%. And you also learn to surround yourself with talent, which is exactly what I've done today. So I'm going to talk 20 and listen 80. And I have with me David Klebonis, the COO for the West Palm Beach ACO, the highest performing ACO in the nation. And I also have Andrew Chang, the market president for Florida for Aldane, which is the #1 enabler of ACO success across the nation. Going back to that reference to Washington, going from a clinician to a change leader in healthcare came for me personally around the time the ACA dropped and the meaningful use bill dropped. And that coalescence of forward thinking in primary care and reimbursement, along with the technology and the data to drive it, pulled me into this space, and I've been in it ever since. And that's about the time the CMMI came around, right? The Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation came around in 2010. And the spirit of it was then, and always has been, to look for new ways to achieve the AAA, and really, quite frankly, to behave as the largest payer in the country. Depending on what sources you read, the federal government pays for at least 2/3 of all healthcare in the country. And being the largest payer in that particular case, I think it is beholden to them to look for ways to do this more effectively and achieve better outcomes. And the CMMI plan has had its own turnover, its own transitions. Some of the smartest people I know were at CMMI, Rahul Rajkumar, Tim Rominger, worked with them very closely. They've since moved on to other ventures. They have about a 30% success rate, which is pretty darn good in the innovation space. If you hit 300, they put you in the Hall of Fame. And the most enduring and most durable of that has been the ACO model. So we're going to listen to a couple gentlemen who know a lot about ACOs here locally and also nationally. I'm also going to talk about some of the newer initiatives, specifically around the DCE. And I think it's also important to look through these things as through an innovative lens, and through that these are often open-ended experiments. I'm never surprised that sometimes that they haven't thought the entire dynamics through when they come up with some new plans. And I think with DCE, not only in the start and the next step of it, I think we're going to see a lot of transition, a lot of movement as we get more rapid experience around the country. So having said that, my 20% of the time is up. I'm going to hand the mic over to Andrew, and look forward to a discussion after the panelists have presented.
All right. So as Dr. Lambert said, I'm Andrew Chang. I'm the market president for Aldane here in the Florida market, as well as South Carolina. Just moving right into some of our stats. Aldane was founded back in 2014 by Dr. Farzad Al-Sashari and some others. It's still headed up by that individual, as well as some of those others. We've been very successful. We help to enable and sustain physician independence. And we do that by entering them into value-based care arrangements. Those arrangements, we started with Medicare Shared Savings. We are now all payer. We have Medicaid, we have Medicare Advantage. We also have just regular commercial value-based care arrangements. What I really want to highlight here, even between 2018 to 2021, you saw on this slide 76% increase into risk. It's even more. We actually are consolidating between what we have this year and next year. We are going from 38 ACOs down to 30. Of those 30, there are 3 in basic ED, 26 in full enhanced risk. That's where it's going. We have one that's in basic D, and there's various strategic reasons for that. We'll eventually get them into partial, if not full risk. But this past year, 92% of those 38 ACOs made shared savings in MSSP. And on the other end of the spectrum, which we call non-MSSP, it was 90%. So we've had quite successful outcomes. And earlier this morning, you heard that a lot of that is driven by just really being persistent, having the right engagement, and also understanding the programs, understanding the data that's coming from them. And I think that's something that Alidate has done very well. David and Palm Beach ACO do very well. And you'll get to hear a little bit about some of these models that are coming down. And this has been coined the good, bad, ugly, and different. We'll get into most of that. So moving right along. This is just a timeline to give you an idea of CMMI. So back in 2005, it was the physician group practice determination. There was about 10 physician groups all across the country. And this was really a test. This was a test to see, does this work? Can we do beneficiary alignment? Can we build benchmarks? Can we put people together and make sure that they are both incentivized but also accountable? And those are two words that you'll hear a lot in this session. I think incentivization with accountability is where we need to land if we're going to be really moving healthcare forward and moving it towards value. If you fast forward 7 years, we'll skip over CMMI for a bit. Fast forward 7 years, that's the pioneer ACO. About 1 year later, that's where MSSP comes in. But you'll see within 2010, that is where CMMI was born. And CMMI, there's a slide right after this, so I won't get too deep into it, but they are meant to test, hypothesize, build pilots, and make sure that what we are doing is moving in the right direction. We are testing it out. If it fails, let's drop it, let's sunset it. So, MSSP in 2013 moved into legal law. You cannot change that like you can with CMMI pilots. CMMI has some unilateral decision making that can occur, whereas MSSP takes a lot to move some of those things. You saw in 2019, Pathways for Success came out. We have a lot more movement towards risk. That is a wonderful thing, in Alidate's opinion. And it's been about just as long between PGPD and MSSP, that was 7 years, as it is between MSSP and direct contracting, about 8 years. So direct contracting is the latest and greatest. And really it's around full or partial capitation. Capitation is a word we're going to start to hear a lot more about. Moving into CMMI, current director, Elizabeth Fowler, really, like I was saying, they're there to innovate, try and make sure that what is being delivered is both cost-effective, quality-effective, efficient, and if it does not work, they will sunset it. You'll hear later on about how many programs there are, how many have been sunset, and there's a purpose for all of those things. The models must, like I said, reduce spending, without reducing the quality of care, improve the quality of care without increased spending, and not deny limit coverage. So those are very important tenets that they have. What we've seen, though, is a change in the landscape. And that landscape is pretty much on this curve. So you'll see the bottom there, some of the old ways, PCMH, quality payments, MIPS, and now it's really towards that primary care cap. On the curve itself, you'll see primary care first, basic A and D, which is in those pathways. Those are non-risk-bearing pathways. Basic E, enhanced, direct contracting, next-gen ACO, and full cap and MA. It's really the future. That's the new way of thinking about it. How do we take risk on total cost? And how do we manage that effectively and generate shared savings and really great outcomes? One great breakdown. This is from the Learning and Action Network, or ALN. They break it down into 4 categories. So the first category really is just your typical fee for service. There's no value there. It's what we've been doing forever. You heard this morning, it's really not going to go away. But category 2 is where it gets a little bit more interesting. That's where we link to value, we bring in a portion of payments based off things like quality or efficiency. And then category 3 is typically your ACOs. So this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. And that is the management of episodic care. That is total cost of care potentially. There's some upside, there's also downside. And then category 4 is population-based payments. Those are things like DCE. That's really where full capitation, partial capitation comes in. So when we move into the distribution of these payments, you can see between Medicaid, commercial, Medicare Advantage, and traditional Medicare, if you want to follow the craziness of the graph, it essentially is to say that there's a lot in category 1 still. There's a lot of folks that are still doing traditional fee-for-service. But that category 2 is growing, and especially that category 3. That is where Allocate sits, that's where many of you sit as well. And we want to keep seeing that grow. If you saw the strategy refresh that came out on October 20th from CMMI, it said 57% of traditional Part A and Part B Medicare beneficiaries are not in any accountable care arrangement. There's a lot of ground to make up. And we want to make that up by getting them into some of these higher level categories. So you'll see a lot of growth in category 3 and 4 in the coming years, for sure. And when you break it down even further, this is where things like advanced alternative payment models come in, upside only, and two-sided risk. So, again, APMs, a lot of folks in that role. When it comes to upside, a little less, and even less when it comes to two-sided. And as I said at the forefront, Allocate is moving the majority of our business into two-sided risk. We feel confident, we feel comfortable in that space, we want to make sure that others are as well. And everyone here is a fellow traveler of the road. We want to make sure everyone is successful in this. So the more that we can do to help kind of parse out all this policy, that is part of our role. That's what we do best. So some of the major models, there was 80 total, 30 have been sunsetted, still just about 50. Of those 50, David will talk about it, 6 have been statistically significant to produce savings. 6 out of 80. So there's a lot of things coming. There is also a lot of things that will go away, and they can go away quite quickly. Again, they can make those unilateral decisions, and they can disappear. You will hear about accountable care organizations. I don't think I have to talk to anyone in this room about those. Bundle payments are a big deal as well. We've seen them through CJR and things like that. Medical home models, things like CPC Plus, which after next year will be sunsetted. Primary Care First is really taking its place. And then there's some other models, the Diabetes Prevention Program, All Payer, etc. But we'll get first into some of these episodic-based models. So that is things that are these bundles. These are models that provide the incentives that improve total cost of care accountability, both for providers as well as those that are performing them. So the performance measurement, it is time restricted. There's things like PCI, PCI Advanced, and CJR. I'm actually working with an oncology care model. I find it very fascinating trying to curb some of those costs. It is a very high cost sector. And if we can do that, we can have a lot of downstream impact even into our ACOs, both that are a part of Allocate, but even those that are just being serviced by that oncology care. So really hopeful to see some of those things. And bundles, we're seeing them transfer as we do most things from CMS arena into the private commercial space. So there will be more bundles to come. I can guarantee that. It will be interesting to see what comes out of all of them. Moving into primary care transformation models. So this is where CPC Plus comes in. So that is per member fees to implement 5 functions of advanced primary care, including interdisciplinary care management. There's an incentive payment based on utilization, things for like MSSP. But like I said, CPC Plus, there's in certain markets, there's still those markets as of this year in PCF, but they even expanded it. And Florida is one of those PCF markets. PCF has similarities. There's still some per member payments. There's also flat visit fees. So if you're doing AWBs and used to getting paid the typical AWB rate, it is going to be different under PCF. It's one flat rate. And what they're going to do is adjust it based off of performance, based off of risk factors. And it is a 5-year program. We have some of our practices in it. Some also drop out of it. There's some requirements that they have to work directly with CMMI that become a little laborious. And so some have said, I just can't do it right now, especially after coming out of COVID. And so it will be insightful to see how we continue in the PCF, how we add into the additional cohort that's coming. And then the last is independence at home. So that's a 3-year model, home-based primary care. They are deployed to target the chronically ill. There's incentives on quality, as well as just total cost of care. This is a little bit more on CPC Plus. I won't dive too deep into this. I know y'all can access the slides at a later point through Flicos. But this is additional detail. Really, what to hone in on here is where CPC Plus is / will be soon sunsetting from. And the most important here, I will skip over the talking points, is where PCF is replacing and adding in. It's a big market. You see California on there, you see Florida. This is really meant to try and strategically go at our primary care providers and help them get these upfront payments, adjust them into understanding how to do value, how to really help risk, how to impact their quality scores, and make sure that those performance-based adjustments are really the driver of where they get their revenue. It's not that flat visit fee. It really shouldn't be. If folks are trying to go into PCF to just get the flat visit fee, they're doing themselves a disservice. And within our talking points, the other disservice is if you are in PCF and you are not in an accountable care organization, you are leaving money on the table. I would say that to any primary care multi-specialty group out there. PCF plus MSSP is a win. There's alignment there. Now, David will talk to you about where some of the money comes from, which I won't spoil. But there is an opportunity of that alignment in order to create synergy and bring down total cost of care, impact things like utilization, while still adjusting folks into that mindset of value-based care. That is really what we want to get out of PCF. That's what my hope is for PCF. Now there's accountable care models. Again, I won't go too deep into ACOs, you all know those. There is also the comprehensive ESRD model, or CEC. That's really focused, as you can imagine, on ESRD and the accountability there in terms of cost and quality. And then direct contracting. That is the biggest one. That is the one that is fresh off the presses here in 2021. There's been some pause in things about DCE, and that is really the track options. So there's 3 tracks when they release this. There's global, professional, and geographic. Geographic is on pause. They're trying to figure out some things about that. Most folks you'll see go into global, and that is where it is total care capitation or primary care capitation. Now, again, this is coming out of CMMI. There are interesting facets about this. The one being that if you are in DCE, you cannot also be in an ACO MSSP. You also cannot be DCE and do PCF. So a lot of practices that have signed up for that their ACO being moved into DCE, they are now out of PCF. So getting them to understand some of that while throwing them directly into DCE is going to be an interesting thing for most. And what I will say as well is this has risk right out the gate. MSSP is very proven. It is statistically significant. You can make sure that you're projecting off of these things. When it comes to MSSP, they still have not tested some of the downstream calculations that will occur through DCE. And there's a big blurb there at the bottom around DCE and how much risk is really happening. In order to truly generate savings in DCE in comparison to something like an enhanced, which much of reality is going into, it's going to be double digits savings, which some people can achieve, some people will, some will not. Some are not doing that right now in ACO models. So understanding that there are discount rates that occur that are going to drop the profitability of the DCEs in comparison to, say, an enhanced ACO is something really worth mentioning here. Capitation. This is going to be one of those words that keep coming up. It is circling back. Capitation is a big thing. So there's direct primary care capitation, there's partial capitation, and full capitation. Full cap is really where a lot of folks are going, especially the payers. And we need to help them. We need to help the providers get to this because it's not going to go away. It's going to be increasing in a lot of velocity towards full cap. They may start you out on partial cap, but it will most likely eventually within 3 to 5 years get to full cap if you're in some type of payer arrangement. But the thing with capitation is we want to have that incentive of the cap, but also hold the accountability. That's really where I want to see the majority of folks is having the accountability when it comes to full cap. And Medicare Advantage does that pretty well. Everyone here probably is very familiar with Medicare Advantage. They have designed everything in a way where there is cost against capitation rates. People have really done well in this and are going to continue to do well. Validate has moved into Medicare Advantage as well. And really it's because we need to provide that service offering. A lot of our primary care physicians that are independent have a lot of their panel on MA, and we want to be able to help service that for them as well. And managed Medicaid is something new that we're also into. Managed Medicaid is a very difficult arena to work in. Medicaid population is one where we really have to wrap our arms around those patients and get the care that they need. So, with further ado, I will pass it off to David, who is going to talk about some of the details behind these models. David.
Awesome. So I'm David with Palm Beach ACO. I've been with the company since 2012. It's unbelievable to say that. So I've been in the ACO business for 9 years. I had a question. How many of you work with ACOs? Can you just raise your hand? Okay, this is all. This part of the talk is for you. So Andrew and his team are world class in a lot of things, but they are definitely world class in evaluating these programs and understanding the policies. So what I want to share with you today is our experience as an ACO and give you some tangible things as an ACO to work on so that you can manage the program overlap. So we've done okay as an ACO. We were number one a couple times, and we've distributed over $240 million to physicians. The point of this slide is to say if these things are keeping us up at night, they may be relevant to you too. But what I'm going to talk about next, we actually spent hundreds of hours working on. And you may think, hey, how does Palm Beach ACO have success? And the answer is our doctors are extremely engaged. So these are 2 meetings, one in 2019, one during COVID no less, and we literally have 250, 300 physicians in the room because they are very, very engaged. That's why PBACO does okay. This is how we look at our market and all the different programs that are out there. If you look here, you see that there's fee-for-service as the backdrop, and then in our market, we're kind of big, and you got the Medicare Shared Savings Program, you got DCE, which does not overlap with the Shared Savings Program, and then you got all these other programs. It's important for you to know, especially if you live in a metropolitan area, that any overlapping program, you pay out of your shared savings towards that program. So technically, you're accountable for their work. And it really kind of blindsided us, and we kind of want to share that experience with you, so maybe that doesn't happen to you in the future. So, bundle payment exploded in our market in 2014. It was brought in with tremendous marketing. There was maybe some private equity backing, and they told us it was the future. They told us it was going to replace the shared savings program. In fact, they came in and said, hey, we're going to buy the ACO. And we were totally confused. We were like, this is on 200 patients. Like, how do you think it's going to replace the ACO? And what we found was that they were doing a couple unusual things. So on elective bundle cases, we noticed in the data that some of these participants were taking on the lower risk patients, and then the higher risk patients were going to fee-for-service. We also noticed that the hospitalists and hospitals, again, all supported by data, they would hurry up and admit to manage the bundle. Hey, this is a CHF patient. We got to hurry up and admit this patient so we can manage the post-acute. And they weren't paying close attention to the assessment at the ER, right? So these trends, maybe caused by the bundle, were hurting us. And we met with Medicare and we said, hey, we think you're making some mistakes in this program, but you can't hurt us by your mistakes. So you gotta share this information with us, and you gotta help us manage it. So what they did is they became very transparent in the data. So you can look in your quarterly data and you can see exactly how much you're paying to these other programs. Now, the screen's a little small here, maybe you can download it on your phone, but you take the number of person years, you take the cost per patient, and you can see how much you pay to programs in your area. And it wasn't trivial. We were paying $1 to $1.5 million a year to these programs. And that might be a lot of your shared savings, because that comes right off the top. And then we paid close attention and we managed it, and it dropped down to $125,000 per year. And now it's spiked back up. Why did it spike back up? It's because of primary care first. So now you pay $3 million a year through other programs. All of this data is available to you, so it's in the quarterly file, it's in the non-claims-based payment file. Again, that's the money that Medicare pays to other programs on your patients, and it comes, you're absolutely accountable for it. You can look in these files and you can see the different programs that Andrew discussed. You got CPC, you got primary care first. It shows you what years that they take them out. So, great for us. They no longer take bundle payments out of our shared savings. And you can see on this chart, You just open up your quarterly file, you part of the chart. You can see in this chart that it says CJR and bundle payment are nil. And so we're able to use this information and understand how we're being affected by those other programs. When you bring up the file, you'll see lots of $14, $15 payments to CPC. You'll see lots of $100 payments to Primary Care First. And then back in the day with Bundle, you can see like $2,000, $3,000 payments with Bundle. You'd see some negative payments with Bundle too, because if they failed, it actually bumped up your shared savings. But we have to look at this information to learn. And so, you can go in and look at your own files, but we have a vendor, and they have a lot of capabilities, and this wasn't that big of a deal for them. So we asked them to load all this information. So we don't have to do anything special, just like clockwork. We come in and we can see exactly how much these payments are affecting the doctors. And this is really important, because if the doctor's getting payments to these other programs, they can't expect their shared savings to be the same. So in this case, on this screen, the doctor's getting $100 PMPM through Primary Care First. And we have to accurately calculate their payment based on that $100 coming out of their shared savings. And they're always surprised to hear that. Oh, no, I didn't know that would come out. And say, what did you think? There's only one total cost of care bucket. But our vendor, Blue Sky, does a really good job of doing this for us automatically. It takes a little bit, but you can research in the data exactly which one of your patients dropped the programs. So you got the cost element, and you got the patients that drop. So you can look in the CMMI, the map, and you can see that maybe there's an ESCO in your market. You can see the bundle payments in your market, and then you can understand why some of your patients are dropping. But we used to have about 500 patients drop a year to other programs, and great for us, we merged with the next generation ACO, and now that number dropped down to about 20. But all of this information is available to you. I wouldn't expect you to keep up with all the rules, but at least you can keep up with how it's affecting your own data. I'll just mirror what Andrew said is, working with CMMI for 9 years, I wish somebody told me these things, is, watch out when someone says that this new program is the future, because maybe, but chances are it's 6 out of 80. And it's possible the program is not successful. So just be a little bit cautious about CMMI programs replacing your current program. The other thing I'll comment is, if you're making a lot of money in your current program, I would never recommend switching to CMMI, because I guarantee if you set the record in shared savings, they have the authority to change it. And they're probably not going to go over budget to pay you. So just be aware there's so much flexibility in the program that if you make a killing through CMMI, it's highly unlikely that they'll pay you all that money and maybe be criticized as a program. But Dr. Lambert's going to maybe ask us some questions. That's a great color commentary.
And I know we got a little bit of a late start, so we've got a couple questions here for the panelists, and then we'll open it up to the audience as well. And sometimes, just looking at the faces out there, sometimes managing a gunshot wound is so straightforward compared to healthcare economics, right? So let's not be too overwhelmed. Gentlemen, let's talk about, if anyone was at the NACOS conference in DC a couple months ago, there was a really robust discussion for an hour on compensation models. And it was fascinating, and I think I left with maybe more questions, but they were more sophisticated questions than what I had. So just know that this is something that everyone is working together in real time. And if you heard Brent's keynote this morning, there are 3 models. There's last year's, this year's, and next year's. So we're seeing a lot of that. But just to get a data will start with you on comparing to forming fee for service plus VPC, capitation upside plus cap downside.
Sure. So what we found over the years, and a great ACO executive shared this with me, is if you pay a doctor the biggest check they've ever received in their life, the following year they're going to be missing quite a bit of work to spend, right? So we're highly reluctant to pay the doctors a lot of money up front. If they need the money for investment, that's okay, right? But we're very reluctant. If we pay capitation, or if there's a program that pays capitation, we have 9 long years to know that they have no incentive to work and earn that money on the back end. And our best physicians have great savings, 3 or 4 out of 5. So we would be quite concerned with capitation with no downside. So of those models there, we like the fee-for-service plus value-based care. And then at a minimum is if you do capitation, there has to be some risk, or else I'll be very concerned about the physician's performance.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, I would agree. Fee-for-service plus value-based is really where we need the space that we're functioning in today. But if we are going to go into capitation, we need, like I said in my presentation, we need accountability with those incentives. We need to make sure that those docs are really performing, that they are doing the things that is necessary. Allocated aligns with what is good for doctors, is good for patients, is good for society. Having fee-for-service and value-based, it hits those 3 tenets. Having capitation with risk, it does the same.
Thank you. And Kyle Sports on my team is back there. He knows that I have 2 answers to every question. The first one is no, and the second one is keep it simple. And so when I think about this, I love the concept of fee-for-service with BBC, but man, it gets sticky. And it gets tough to understand and sometimes creates anxiety amongst provider groups if you get in front of a room like this and have trouble explaining it. So I'm certainly a fan of capitation, and there has to be downside risk. Downside risk makes you change your operations. Value-based care is not a physician activity. It is a team sport. It is a team-based primary care. With downside risk, it makes you adjust your operations to that. If you stick your toe in BBC waters, you're just going to stay there. If you take on risk, it's going to make you make the switch to provide team-level care. That's my 2 cents, guys. And then let's talk about some tried and true versus the new, right? MSSP versus DCE. Let's just plans in general. I think for short-term and long-term.
Yeah, so short-term, we are standing strong in MSSP. We find a lot of value there. We understand the model. We have capabilities of projecting where that's going. As you heard, we are going from 38 down to 30 ACOs. There's that consolidation for a reason. We're doing these things in order to maximize the models. We're moving into enhance. We're getting providers comfortable with risk. The frontier of DCE, we're going to sit on the sidelines and watch. We want to see what happens. We have a lot of DCEs here in the market. A lot of them are private equity backed, and we want to see what happens. We want to see what goes on in that space, but we are firmly planted right now in MSSP.
It's a hot topic, and I'm sure your ACOs are hearing about DCE. And our board is very well connected, and they ask frequently, "Hey, are we converting to DCE? It's the next best thing." And my one-liner is, "You realize Alligate's not going," and that really helps me a lot. Well, yes. But we started a very small DCE, and the only reason why we did it is because the deadline to enroll physicians was another 45 days, and we had enough doctors that were ready to sign too late, and rather than have them sit out a year, we enrolled them. Not even one doctor converted from our MSSP to DCE. And there's a lot of stats on the differences. The big one for me is you have to put up 7 times more escrow under DCE as you do under MSSP. So is the reward worth 7 times as much? And then with the physician fee schedule change, they just halved the MSSP escrow. So now DCE is 14 times higher risk than MSSP. So we'll see how it goes, but we really think that the MSSP enhanced is the better program right now.
Yeah, again, I would look through this as it's still very much in the trial phase. I think we're going to see some short-term course corrections and some long-term corrections for sure. On DCE, the timing of it was unique, certainly affected by COVID, and so we'll see exactly how that plays out over time. Having said that, I know we've got a late start. Samantha's not kicking us out yet. I know Brian, you had a question. Here, I don't think so.
So, David, just for clarification, the money that gets paid to the other programs that you highlight, right? That comes out from that payment that goes to the other programs, right? That comes out of the total pot of shared savings because because those programs were able to achieve savings as well. So that's what you're referencing there.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to know that. Thanks.
I don't know if you guys have the answer to this question, but I didn't realize that SIP was coming back with primary care first, and so I don't know if we had filed an application, will that carry over into the new version, or do we start over? And then I don't know if there's actually been an announcement or guidance on that that's been issued, but I haven't seen that, so I'm excited about it.
Yeah, so SIP was a component of PCF when it was first rolled out for 2021. Anybody that got into SIP, they basically paused it and said that they're going to move it into 2022. I need to check back in and see if that still is truly the case. But SIP is coming back as a component of PCF, but it is a wholly separate component. So you can still do PCF, you can still be in that, you can also add on SIP if you want.
You'll be able to do SIP and stay, or MSSP, ACO as well.
You will. It's globally under PCF, so you can do PCF, PCF SIP, and MSSP.
Any other questions?
This is for Palm Beach. So I wanted to hear a little bit more, if you could, about the secret sauce. And what I mean is, your other presenter mentioned it's a team sport. But when we all looked at the reviews of the MSSP program, the two things that were knocked out of the park were the medical record review and the HRAs. So I wanted to hear, since you made such high earnings, is it really a team sport, or is the med record review behind the scenes driving a lot of your earnings? How are you planning on managing that going forward as CMS changes that gaming value? Go ahead.
Sure, it's a great question. So, number one, we have the best physicians. So, we're in a market that's metropolitan, and we have the right amount of hospital competition, where the doctors are really driven not to sell in the hospital, and they are very motivated to stay independent. So, they are happy to go above and beyond, so they don't have to work for somebody else. They're willing to stay late. They're willing to do the ACO work. And I think we're lucky to have that in our market. But to answer your question about the team, we're a volume shop. So, we ask doctors what help they need, and they said, hey, we need clerical help to schedule appointments. And we schedule 850 wellness visits every week. We schedule 200 TCM every week, right? And we dramatically increase PCP access. When COVID hit, we had a calling. There was 7, 8 offices that completely closed. They were destitute. They had huge staffing issues, and they said, hey, can you help us? And we rolled out this comprehensive telehealth billing program. We gave them exactly how you do telehealth. And we got a call from Care Journey. Anish has access to national data. He said, hey, you guys did a little telehealth, huh? And I said, oh my gosh, we were here all weekend, and we were killing ourselves for it. He's like, you did the most telehealth of any ACO in the country. But it's just hard work and the best physicians, and it's worked out okay.
The only other thing I would add to that, and we heard this in the keynote, we could put our operating model on the front page of any newspaper. It is about execution, and to David's point, it is about these physicians and their buy-in. We really need to make sure that we are there helping to service them and make sure that they are really being held accountable, but also understanding what accountability means. When COVID hit, we did the same thing. We stood up telehealth, and these folks would not be able to survive, period. There would have been clinics shutting down their doors. There would have been deserts where there used to be medical care. And we did that overnight. And we did it because we had to. And the physicians had to, and they understood that they had to. And we are now leveraging some of those things in order to drive better access. Keep telehealth around. Let's keep doing it, but in a different way. And that is very important. But the overall picture, our operating model is not any different from what David is doing in West Palm. We are doing a lot of AWPs, we are doing TCM, chronic care management. It is all things, but it is all about physician execution and buy-in.
So the HRAs and the med record review weren't big assistance to your programs?
It was not for us. I wasn't at that. Was it around risk adjustment? So that is a great program for Medicare Advantage, but it's just not an enormous revenue factor on the MSSP side. So you can only increase your benchmark by around 3%. And if you increase your utilization management or drop your PMPM, you can have 20% of savings. So we spend a little bit more time, probably appropriate, on the risk adjustment because we go after the 20%.
Yeah, we have the same. We really, the only thing that is different is when you get into an enhanced, you get rebased or rebenchmark. And that is an opportunity to also reap the rewards of what you've been able to do through appropriate diagnoses. And that is one thing that we stress highly, is appropriate diagnoses, not upcoding. That is a very bad term in our world. But it is appropriate diagnosis. It's making sure that we are truly saying how sick our patients are, because if they don't know, they're not going to set aside the funds. And so for us, it is, there is that 3%, but it's not a big thing. You can actually have a market in certain areas where the rural glitch happens, and it grows faster than that 3%. So then you have to make 7, 8% in order to make up for that. And that also was not fixed in the latest fee schedule. We're going to continue to push for that because it is very important. It's something that's negatively impacting ECOs, and it's just, in my opinion, unfair.
Yeah, good stuff. Eventually, we'll join the rest of the world and get through this prospective payments without basing it on physician documentation, and we'll get physicians out of the prior auth business. But until then, doctors are people too, and people tend to behave the way they're incentivized to behave. So get out the incentives, and I think you'll find out that you can get success. If you don't have the infrastructure internally, Andrew's there to help you because there's that much there in changing your operations. Any other questions?
How do you think the benchmarks are going to be impacted when you go to the next contract period? Because they want you to achieve like a certain level of savings. So, because you're the best performing ACO in the US, how do you think it will impact the ACOs that are doing well? Right?
Yeah, I mean, that's where we don't want to sit on our laurels. As much as we can do AWPs and TCMs and all those things, we can risk adjust up to the 3%. There are other factors that are at play that we have not touched and we'll pull that lever on total cost of care. So even with that ratchet change, we can still make an impact at the end of the day. And that's why we can move the majority of our ACOs to enhanced. We know that there is a lot more juice to squeeze there, and we are going to be doing that in the coming years and months because that is what we have to do. There is more to be had in that, and it's not just going to be risk adjustment. That is not how you're going to see it.
You have a great question, and the original program got a lot of criticism because it was 100% historical benchmark, so it's all based on improvement, right? And it was absolutely true that you couldn't squeeze blood out of the stuff, but this is a good program. And Medicare took that feedback, and now you get 35% of the benchmark comes from your region. And most of the physicians, you ask them, are you better than the region? And they'll say, absolutely. And if you work with independent physicians as compared to hospital employee physicians, I mean, this is accurate based on national data, they're less per capita. So we actually have a tailwind as independent physicians on 35% of the benchmark. And guess what? When the contract resets, it goes to 50%. So we get an additional tailwind. So, fingers crossed that the program doesn't change, but it looks like independent physicians have at least another 10 years of long-term business model.
Thank you.
Any others? We'll hang out as long as Samantha lets us hang out in here. All right, any other questions? Gentlemen?